Okay. So good evening. Simon Jacobson is my name. And I welcome you all, as well as the web audience. Warm regards from the Holy Land. I just landed literally 2 hours ago. So I bring the holiness and the wisdom and all the power of Israel with me here. Can you tell on my face? Oh, really? Good. That's good. Okay. Okay. I hope it lasts. I was just there for a 2-day visit. It was a short visit, meaningful visit. And we'll talk tonight about the curse of divisiveness. It's not a pleasant topic to discuss. Yet it's a very hard reality in our lives, personal, communal, and global. And it happens to be also a central theme of this week's Torah portion, as well as in general the time period in which we're in, which is called the 3 weeks that began yesterday, Tuesday, with a fast day. The 3 weeks, exactly Tuesday, 3 Tuesdays later will be Tisha B'Av, 3 weeks, 21 days. Called Ben Hamtzarim, sometimes based on a verse in the book of Lamentations, Echa, which we read Tisha B'Av at night, which literally means Ben Hamtzarim means between the two straits, between the dire straits, referring to this period, which is the saddest time in the Jewish calendar. Historically, the most tragic events in Jewish history happened in this period. Shivasa B'Tammuz yesterday, in both temples, according to some opinions, the Babylonians first, and 490 years later the Romans scaled the walls of Jerusalem. And 3 weeks later to the day, on Tisha B'Av, both temples were burned down. Again, respectively by the Babylonians, the first temple, and then the Romans, the second. So it's just interesting that it happened on the same day, the same period. So, punctuated by these two sad events are the 3 weeks, which means that basically it escalated from scaling the wall all the way till actual burning down the temple. So ever since then, we commemorate this period in time. It's a form of mourning and grieving, even though it's thousands of years later, to recollect and the sadness of the destruction of the temple, which in itself begs the question, why do we cry over a building, a structure? Even when, God forbid, someone sits Shiva, which are 7 days, not more, not less, for the loss of a parent or a close relative. So it's specifically not more than 7 days. And here, we're talking about close to 2,000 years that we're sitting Shiva. Tisha B'Av, actually, the lights are dimmed in the synagogues, the chairs are lowered, and it's an actual Shiva in many ways, which is not consistent with the laws of Avelis, of mourning and grieving, which says that you mourn and grieve and then you move on and you grow through it and you go to the next level. So I'll answer that question in the process. But going back to the divisiveness issue, that this was not just, so that technically the temple was destroyed, and before that, on the 17th of Tammuz, the Mishnah says 5 different sad things that happened, sad traumatic events, the breaking of the tablets, and other events like that, and the same thing on Tisha B'Av. But on a deeper spiritual and psychological level, the root of it all comes down to human behavior. See, the reason we grieve over a temple, over a building, is because it wasn't just a building. It was a gate between heaven and earth. As Jacob tells us in the Bible tells us that when Jacob was traveling, and he was escaping Esau and traveling toward Haran, where he would ultimately build his family, so it says on the way he fell asleep. Vayetze Yaakov Be'er Sheva. Right in the beginning of the chapter, he fell asleep and he had the famous dream, Jacob's ladder. But in the middle, when he realized where he was, he woke up and he was very disturbed because he said, "I did not realize the holy ground I was sleeping on, which is the holy Temple Mount." Even though the temple wasn't built yet, but that was a holy ground even before that, because certain offerings were brought there. It was a sacred ground. And that's when he says the expression, Zeh Shar Hashamayim. This is the gate to heaven. That's Jacob's expression. So the temple is not just a building, it's a bridge, an interface between heaven and earth, between spirit and matter, between soul and body, between these two seemingly disparate worlds. So the temple becomes a bridge that connects them. So when the temple was destroyed, it wasn't just a building, another building, and you could always rebuild another one in its place. It actually was a gate was closed in some ways. And ever since, when we say we're in exile, in Golus, we say, Mipnei chateinu galinu ma'artzeinu, because of our sins, we've been exiled. Exile isn't just a physical displacement that the Jews were chased out of Israel by the Romans then, and now are making their way back. But it was also, more importantly, it was a spiritual displacement. It was a loss of purpose. It was like a loss of mission, a sense of spiritual disparity and dissonance that has since then plagued us till this day. So that's why even in Israel, during the holidays, they also say the prayer, Mipnei chateinu galinu ma'artzeinu, which means because of my sins, because of our sins, we were exiled from the land. You'd wonder, why would anyone say that in Israel? They are in Artzeinu. Why do they say galinu ma'artzeinu? Because clearly Golus, exile, is not just a physical thing, it's a spiritual thing. You can be in the Holy Land and also not be connected, unfortunately. So the root of the whole issue here, therefore, is basically our connection to our roots, our connection to our purpose. What's the difference? What's the opposite of a connection? Is a disconnection, and hence divisiveness. So the Talmud actually states it very loud and clear. It says that the second temple was destroyed because of sinas chinam, because of baseless hatred. The Jews had hatred to each other. There was infighting. There was divisiveness. As such, God basically said, in a divided home I cannot rest. What's the point of having a holy temple when the whole point is that God rests among us? You know the expression in the Bible, it's not God resting in the building. It says, also limigdash v'shachanti b'seicham. Build for me a temple and rest, I will rest among you. Why did it say among you? The beginning of the verse says, build me a temple. It should have said, I will rest in it. That's what the Shalah asked the question. And the answer he gives is because the purpose of the temple is not that God rests in the stones and the wood and the object and the materials that the Mishkan or the Mikdash were made out of, but that God rests among us. Now when the us is divided, God cannot rest. Think of it like a parent cannot come home when the children are at war with each other. So in a sense, it was our own undoing. It was our own doing that caused God's Shekhinah, God's presence, to be unable to rest in that place any longer. That's what it says in the Talmud, divisiveness. Now, we live in a world where it's a given that people are divided against each other. Firstly, just simply pure observation, a pure empirical observation. You see, everyone is focused on their own self-interest, and the only reason we coexist and there's cooperation is because there's mutual benefit. That's the world in which we live. So maybe when you're young and naive, you feel that people can just love each other unconditionally, it's one thing. But then when you're thrown into the hard, cruel world, you suddenly realize that everyone's out for themselves. The dog eats dog world. And survival of the fittest. And then when you know a little science and psychology, that make the case that the human being basically is a self-absorbed narcissist. And Freud puts it in the most extreme terms, the id, where a person is completely focused on just self-pleasure, principle, self-interest, and everything else is superimposed. And then when you see, as I said, you witness it around, it becomes part of reality. That divisiveness seems like the natural state of affairs. It's a miracle when people get together, basically. So which is the anomaly, the divisiveness or coexistence and peace? And then when you witness all the wars through history, and till this day, wars that are fought in different countries, between countries, within countries, civil wars, and then you bring it further into our own communities, it becomes a given, sadly, that we have made peace with war, basically. We made peace with what Judaism would call the anomaly. Because obviously the Jewish approach is that divisiveness is not the natural state of affairs. And to the extent that it's become something that's acceptable. I'll never forget my father telling me, my father was born in Moscow. And he lived in the former Soviet Union under Stalin, which is a completely different world than the world in which we live. A world driven by fear, a world that every day you do not know what's going to be tomorrow. None of the securities that we take for granted and the freedoms and so on. And you can sit in a room like this and study Torah and do whatever you wish, no one will bother you. In that Soviet Union, sitting here was at great risk to your life. There were informers, you could be arrested. I mean, it was just a constant state of fear and panic and so on. My father tells me the story about when he was a little kid and they came to arrest my grandfather. My namesake, my grandfather. So my namesake is Simon. My grandfather was Simon Yakubashvili. He was a Georgian Jew. But later became a chassid. And he joined a small secret group, the previous Chabad Rebbe, in 1923, made a blood pact, called in a secret meeting in Moscow, 9 other people, and made it with a minyan, with a quorum, and said, I'm making a blood pact that each of us will do whatever it takes to the last drop of blood in our bodies to make sure that Judaism some way survives in this God-forsaken country. Because remember, 1923, right after the Russian Revolution, World War I, and Stalin's coming to power, basically all of Judaism was shut down. I mean, God forbid, I don't even want to mention it, but make believe that everything in the United States called Jewish is suddenly forbidden. And Russia was then America as far as the Jewish population. You're talking about millions and millions of people. Some say there were 10 million Jews in the 20s and 30s. You know, the first immigration that came to the United States is mostly from Russia because of the pogroms. That was in the early... So, some say in the beginning of the 20th century there were 10 million Jews, Russia and Eastern Europe. Which could make sense because that was the major bulk of the population of the Jews. You know, remember Hitler killed 6 million just alone in Europe and Eastern Europe. So the numbers are not that. It could have been a lot more than that as well. But the previous Chabad Rebbe basically refused to yield, and he called in these 9 men, and one of them was my grandfather. And of course they were a great risk because they would go around and build these secret underground synagogues and mikvahs and circumcise children and slaughter kosher meat and just keep the flame burning. You could think, what was he going to accomplish? 1 man, 10 men against a mighty Soviet Union. But look who prevailed. No, his grandchildren, this Rebbe and all his descendants are here alive and kicking. I'm one of them. And Stalin's grandchildren, no one even knows where they are. The Soviet Union had crumbled ever since. Judaism was going through a renaissance in that country. So, my grandfather was a part of that group, and he was arrested, you know, for these what they called counter-revolutionary forces. And my father told me how he remembered vividly. He was a little kid, how they came to arrest him in Moscow. And my grandmother was crying. I mean, you're talking about a young man. My grandfather was 29 years old when they arrested him. My grandmother was 27. I mean, the baby, and my father and his little brother were babies. They were 6, 5 years old. Now, when someone was arrested then, you didn't come out that fast. You didn't come out at all. So it was a given that was assumed that the person was dead. So, of course, my grandmother would go every day. My father told me to the government offices, try to find out, trace. I mean, they knew he was sent off to Siberia, but as I said, no one really came back from there. But this is the thing that struck me, and something I'll never forget, my father telling this to me. He says the night after he was arrested, there was a knock on the door, like late at night. And my grandmother got scared. You know, my father was her son, my father was awake with her. You know, who's coming? They open the door, and it's an older chassid. It's an older chassid who snuck his way in there. And he had 2 bags, and he put them down. And they had a significant amount of money, ruble. And he said to her, you probably need this, so keep this. Now he was not a relative, he wasn't her brother, he wasn't a family member. He was a chassid in Moscow. And he just put down, and I remember when my father told it to me, I said to him, so this was common? Like this is what people did? He says, yeah. He said, no one had bank accounts. There was no such thing as retirement plans. No one was going anywhere. We're all in the same boat, and everybody was constantly under the threat of the gun. Anybody could be killed any minute. I said, so there was this real, complete sharing, money? And those that had shared, because it was a given. And I said, so what happened when they came to America? He said, everything changed. Here there's bank accounts. Everybody has a plan. And it struck me how different the two worlds are. And this was my father who was in both worlds. And he saw how it changed. And it struck me about, whether divisiveness is really natural or not. It's become a given to us because we live in that type of world. Even if it's not malicious, each of us has our bank account. Each of us has our so-called space. There's an expression that's sometimes used in a positive way, but sometimes in a negative way. It says, in times of peace in Israel, it was ish tachas gafnei v'ish tachas teinase. Each person lived under his vineyard, near his vineyard, and near his teinase, his fig trees. So on one hand, it's a positive blessing. It's like saying it's a time of peace. Everybody's home in their own place, calm. This one has their vineyard, this one has their fig tree. But it's also often used the opposite way, that people are just involved in themselves. And everyone's under their fig tree or under their vineyard, and there's no caring about another. Now, we all have, obviously, certain noble side to us. People can be charitable and kind and giving, but it often takes a lot of effort for some, and it's not something that's always common. So my father describing that scenario, struck a chord in me that started thinking about how kind of world we live in. Because it seems so normal. I mean, why shouldn't everyone have their own bank account? Why let's just share our bank accounts? I mean, each of us, everybody makes their money, ingenuity and efforts and geniuses. Why would they share from their income with another person? There's no real answer with that, and I don't think they have to necessarily. But there was once a world where that was not an issue, because the priorities of life were outshined the people just taking care of their own particular needs. So when you talk about divisiveness in the broad sense of the word, in the world that nations are at war with each other, many people see it as a natural thing. Nations are diverse, they have different interests, and as such, they're going to ultimately at times be at war with each other, unless they find some way to find some mutual benefit. But let's take the point all the way back to ourselves personally, and there we don't tolerate it so much. The word divisiveness, as I said, on a global level becomes so distant and vague and abstract that it doesn't really bother us in a way, even though nobody likes war. But the idea is, okay, that's the nature of the universe. But let's take it all the way back to our personal lives, each of us. What is it like to grow up in a home that is divided? What does it do to a child? To each of us growing up in a fractured environment. And then suddenly, it doesn't become such an abstract, vague concept, because then it hits home, no pun intended. When you speak about large numbers, okay, yeah, nations, they have different interests. Some nations, some leaders are seeking power. We don't see the so-called negative consequences of that type of divisiveness quite as much as we see it in our own personal lives. So when you look at divisiveness, growing up in a home, say a child is born into a home where the parents do not get along with each other, broken home, even if they're living with each other. 50% of children will grow up in a divorced home. Now, a divorced home means technically divorced, legally divorced. How many are emotionally divorced and just technically together? No one really knows that number. So what is the impact on the psyche of a child that grows up in an environment like that? It's almost impossible to really do studies, because number one is most people don't acknowledge it and don't talk about it. And many of these things, you can't really go interview little children who are before the age of being able to communicate. The damage is done at a time when the children can't really express it. All we can see it is in the consequences of what these children turn into as an adults. Now, I didn't do any scientific studies, but from the little I see, and from the little I've been exposed to, most people are struggling and haunted by their childhoods. Some more conscious, some less conscious, some going through a lot of therapy, some less. And it affects, above all, it affects your ability to trust, your ability to love, the ability to commit. Everything that requires some form of vulnerability is going to be affected by a child growing up in a divisive environment. Why? Because divisiveness upsets the balance, upsets your sense of security. That's what divisiveness does on a very basic level. You come into a room and people are fighting there. If you go to a party and the hosts, you can tell, are bitter. It spills over to the rest of the room, whether they say it or not. You just feel there's a certain tension in the room. You go to, obviously, to a party or to an event where the hosts are pleasant. It also spills down. There's something very revolting and even repulsive when you're in a tense environment. You don't want to be there, because divisiveness does something to our soul and psyche that is very disturbing. What does it really do? Let's analyze it. What it does is it makes you feel insecure, basically. Because you can't trust the situation. Because divisiveness means there's two agendas, and these two individuals can't get along. So what does it leave the person who's so-called vulnerable to the situation completely confused? This is even true for adults, mind you. You go into a room where two people are fighting, you just want to get out of there. And if they try to get you involved, you really don't want to be involved. What impact does it have on children who don't even have the ability to process what I'm saying? And they're just completely vulnerable. The damage must be a devastating effect. The joke they tell about this guy doesn't have a home, didn't have a place to stay, so he calls his sister and says, "Can I stay by you for a while?" So she asks her husband, he says, "Okay, fine, let him stay." How long? He's going to stay for a week. Well, the week becomes a month, and the month becomes 6 months, And finally one day the husband, the brother-in-law, basically tells his wife, "Listen, it's your brother, and enough is enough. I mean, he's just constantly, with their breakfast, lunch, supper, he's nice, but who needs him here? I mean, he's just an extra presence, It's one thing for a little while, like he's moved in." And so she says, "Listen, he's my brother, that's why I'm so close. You're not, you're essentially, you're not blood connection. It's easier for you to say something than for me." And of course they get into a fight, who should be the one. So they come up with a brilliant plan. And it's one of the Chelam ideas, Chelam stories. They said, tomorrow morning by breakfast, he'll always be there cordially by breakfast, and he helps prepare and clean up and all that. So by breakfast, you and I, the husband and wife, made up, we'll get into a fight about some stupid issue, some political topic. You, for example, will be pro-Democrat, I'll be pro-Republican, and we'll have some fight. And we'll really get the fight going, get really escalated into a real battle. And then we'll turn to him and say, "What do you think?" And whoever side he takes, the other one says, "Out of this house." That will be our so-called excuse to get him out of here. Of course, these type of plans usually backfire, and this one did too. So that's what happens the next morning. They get into this fight, and then what happens, of course, they get into a real fight. Because they started as a fake fight, but then they took it too seriously, and then they suddenly both looked at each other and they realized why they're fighting. So they both looked at him and said, "What do you think?" To the brother-in-law, to the brother-in-law. So he says, I can't get involved here. I have to be on both your good terms, Okay. So he ended up staying there, and they ended up fighting. The point is that divisiveness, as I said, when you analyze it, it doesn't take much to understand why it's so disturbing, because we humans gravitate to unity on every possible level. Unity just creates calm in our spirits, in our psyches. And you see this even from young children on. Look at children, you give them objects of different shapes and sizes. Without any training or education, they will naturally fit a sphere into a sphere, a star into a star, a circle into a circle, a square, a rectangle into a rectangle. You'll see. They will look to make sense of it. I'm not talking about a newborn. I'm talking about once a child is able to. And we too, we naturally try to make order in our lives. You get a lot of bits of information, you figure out some way to organize it. Even the most disorganized of people, if you ask them, they have their own so-called organization. As I think I mentioned here, once came into an office, and the guy had a desk, I'm telling you, it was almost to the ceiling, full of papers, literally, the whole thing. And I said, "How do you ever find anything?" So he says, tell me what you're looking for. And I mentioned something, and he knew, he pulled it right out. In his mind, this disorganization was organized. Well, what do they say? They say, if a cluttered desk is a sign of a cluttered mind, what is an empty desk a sign of? That's the justification. So point being that even so-called disorganized people, they have their own way, certain type of organization, because the thing is, chaos Chaos, we abhor chaos. We're disturbed when things don't make sense, when we see things don't fit. We call beauty, for example. And beauty is one of those elusive terms. What makes something beautiful? No one really has a full answer. Is it beauty is in the eyes of the beholder? Yet there are things that are objectively beautiful that many, many people will all consider to be beautiful. The best that scientists can come up with is that some form of invisible symmetry. A beautiful face. What makes a beautiful face? Is it the eyes? Is it the nose? Is it the mouth? The complexion? It's a combination of all of them, particular symmetry, and how they're juxtaposed with each other. When something is a little off, it disturbs us. So the concept of the effect of divisiveness on the psyche, no matter whether you're an adult or a child, is very profound, because, and now this is the deeper reason for it, the Kabbalistic, mystical, psychological reason, is because the universe is naturally a united place. When we say Hashem Echad, the most famous of all liturgies, the prayer Shema, we're saying not just that God is one, but that there's one reality. There's a fundamental unity that's inherent to all of existence. Now, this isn't just a religious concept today. Once upon a time, you could say this is a mystical concept. This is what science talks about all the time, the search for unity. The unified field theory is that elusive theory that will connect all theories. So they've got it down to 3 laws. So once upon a time, before there was the development of modern science, when you saw phenomenon in the world, everything seemed to be fragmented. Basically, science is the discovery of unifying laws that make us understand different, seemingly diverse phenomena under one rule, under one law, or under several laws. And truth is, every system, whether it's geometry, or it's physics, or it's business, or any type of anything in the political or social or physical sciences, is all about finding those laws. A master, an expert, is someone that knows the shortcuts and knows the fundamental principles. Marketing experts can give you their down to the 4 Ps and the 5 thises and 5, 6 that, because there's systems that have been developed over time. Obviously, nothing is foolproof. They could always be modified and improved. But principles are what creates efficiency, and we gravitate toward efficiency. That's on a very basic, even business level. On an emotional level, divisiveness upsets the whole balance within us. In Kabbalistic terminology, there are 2 worlds. There's a world called Tohu and a world called Tikkun. Tohu comes from the second verse in the Torah, where we say, in the beginning God created heaven and earth, and then it says, and the earth was Tohu v'vohu, which is usually translated as Pust und Vist in Yiddish, which means empty and void. You could also say what it really means, Tohu v'vohu, chaotic, empty and chaotic. But this word Tohu in the Kabbalah takes on turns into a major world. It's a world of chaos. But how is this chaos explained? Interestingly, it's explained in 2 ways. Number 1, and just as a contrast, there's Tohu and there's Tikkun. So Tohu is the world of chaos, and Tikkun is the world of repair. We call Tikkun Olam. It comes from that expression. So Tohu and Atzilus, the world of unity, the world of Tikkun, repair. What's the distinction between the world of unity and the world of repair and the world of chaos? So 2 key things, 2 key features distinguish between both of them. In the world of chaos, there's a disparity and there's a very disproportion between the energy, as they call it in the containers, between form and function, between spirit and matter. As the way it's stated is that the energies, the lights, are so intense that they cause the kalim, the containers, to shatter. What that means in simple English, it means that chaos is caused by disparity, when things are not even. You bring, let's say, someone who's a brilliant teacher to engage with a bunch of idiots, there's going to be disparity, because his light are too great for their containers. Some person, for example, doesn't have disciplined love. You can love someone and kill them with your love too. Because love is not just about giving, it's also about measuring the giving toward the containers of the person that can receive it. So the first thing in the world of orders requires balance. A balance between the energy and the container. Too much energy without proper containment can be destructive. The second feature that distinguishes between the chaotic world, chaos, toyu, and tikkun, is that in toyu everything consists of two paths, and in tikkun there's a third path. There's a middle path. What that means is that in toyu, in tikkun, in chaos there's extremes, extreme right, extreme left. In tikkun there's a middle path that moderates, that again creates balance. To use an example in our own bodies, we're all structures. For a structure to stand, it has to have at least 3 legs. Same thing in architecture. For a structure to have balance, it must have 3 dimensions at least. 4 dimensions make it even more solid. A human body, what would it be like if we had, God forbid, everything working except the spine? The spine, which runs through the middle of the body, is the balancing force. So in the world of chaos, you have 2 extremes. They're very powerful. But there's no moderator. There's no middle path that creates a balance between the 2. And in tikkun there is that third path. So bottom line is, to go back to what we're discussing here, divisiveness is the result of this imbalance. And when there's divisiveness, things cannot stand. You see, for example, great armies, great projects, with excellent teams, excellent soldiers. As soon as they became divided, all their strengths became worthless, even worse than worthless. They began to fight with each other. Very often, in good battles, the best way to defeat your enemy is to get them to fight with each other, because then you destroy them from within. And weaker armies have prevailed because they were united. As a matter of fact, it says this even about in holiness. It says that the soldiers of King David, even though he was representing God's will, because they were fighting with each other, they fell to Avshalom, who had a weaker army, and people who were fighting for not a good purpose, but they were united. The power of unity is enormous, because it creates synergy, and more importantly, it prevents all the wasted time and energy that goes into fighting. So divisiveness, going back to a child's life, a child's world, when there's divisiveness, it is like worse than poison. We may not see it because it's invisible, its effect, but basically it undermines the child's stability, balance, security. And as the child grows older in such a climate, it's constantly has to be hyper vigilant because it doesn't know when the next surprise is coming. That's what chaos does. There's no consistency. God forbid you hear about children who grow up and then they tell you about parents dysfunctional, addictive, alcoholic, and so on. The thing that is most blatant in their expression is the inconsistency. I don't know whether I was getting love or not. You know, when you know that for sure someone's your enemy, in a way it's healthier than not knowing whether you're your enemy or not, because then every day is another story. And that unpredictability creates a profound instability and profound lack of trust in your own instincts. And then you become this hyper-vigilant human being who's constantly on guard. You never know when you're going to be smacked next, when you're going to be hit next. This is all the result of the divisive forces in our lives. So when we talk about it on that level, it's very clear. It doesn't need to make us enough to make a great case, even though it should be elaborated upon, of its destructive elements. It destroys a person's life, basically. And the rest of your life is busy trying to rebuild and find security and trust and trying to rebuild tools of confidence and self-esteem that were essentially stolen from you because you didn't have that type of environment. And I hope none of this resonates with anyone in this room, but I'm sure you know friends that it probably resonates with, so you can use it in that sense. The truth is, I don't think that there's anyone on earth that this does not resonate with, because we all have elements of it. The question is, what measure, to what extent? So in this period of time, when we honor the destruction of the temple, and we honor the 17th of Tammuz leading to Tisha B'Av, really what we're talking about is that we're honoring and we're revisiting the divisiveness within ourselves. Because remember, if there was no divisiveness within you and your psyche, and within you and your family, and within you and your community, there'd be no divisiveness in the larger world as well. Because remember, The larger world is just a bunch of individuals like us. So the first and foremost thing to state, and that's in a fascinating way why we honor the 3 weeks, it's not about grieving over the past. There's no benefit in just dwelling on a broken past. As I said earlier, crying over a destroyed temple. You know what we're dwelling on? We're dwelling on and appreciating the destructive force of divisiveness in our lives. Because half the cure of an illness is awareness. And minimizing it, or ignoring it, or denying it, makes it worse. So basically, these 3 weeks are dedicated toward a war against divisiveness. That's what it said. So just like sinas chinam, baseless hatred, destroyed the temple, what's the counter for the antidote? Baseless love will rebuild it. That's how it works. So the purpose of these 3 weeks is not just to remind us of negative things. It's to remind us the destruction that comes from divisiveness. To the point that, yes, it creates dissonance between us and God, between us and each other, between you and yourself, between you and your family, between nations. So the whole world essentially has been toxified by the divisiveness that began when the temple was destroyed. And then it just spilled over and became to the point that for many of us it became the new reality. And the anomaly for us is when you see unity. That's like a big chiddush. That's a big innovation. So the 3 weeks is about awareness and understanding the consequences of this. And the best place to begin, as I said, is in our own self. Now you'd be amazed how much that type of awareness begins the healing process. So think of it, if you have an infection, God forbid, you're not even aware of it, you can imagine an infection festers, and it can cause a lot of damage in the long term. But as soon as you're aware, you already know there's an intruder inside of you. There's an intruder that you need to do something about. Do something about it. You may not know exactly what to do, but you're already in a place where there's so-called fresh air. Infection needs fresh air for it to heal. When it thrives in darkness, in ignoring it, in denial, psychologically speaking. So that's the first step. The second is that no matter what happened in our lives, in our childhoods, no matter how fractured, how divisive, there's always a way back to your united soul. Because you see, your soul never really gets damaged. What gets damaged are the arteries, the channels that connect the soul to your life. In other words, the conscious and your conscious awareness of things. But in essence, it always remains intact. That's why you can see this consistently. And I remember several years ago I met someone who was coming to this class, and I would say that this was a person, epitome of a very fractured life, growing up in a terrible, terrible home. Now this person, she became a musician. She was very musical. She was musically oriented. And I once saw her playing piano. She played some other instruments as well. And there was a calm that came about her when she was playing piano that was very, powerful. More than you just see it regularly. I mean, even every pianist and every instrument player has a certain discipline. When you're good, you have a discipline how you play. It almost seems like effortless, musical. The movements, how a body sways when it plays an instrument, especially piano. But in this case, in this instance, it seemed like much more powerful than that. Like she was in a different place. And, she had spoken to me about her life and her situation, completely estranged from her unhealthy parents, going into all the graphic details. But when I saw her playing the music, I realized there was the healing. And she wasn't even aware of it, to the extent why she so gravitated to music, because it was her oasis. It was her ability to find a place of peace, a place of harmony. And yeah, it could be somewhat escapist, but it wasn't unhealthy. It wasn't escapist like going into drugs or self-medicating or numbing to the pain. And at the time it struck me because I was always familiar with the interface and the parallels between music and spirituality. And both are driven by the same thing, soul, which is unity. Music is harmony. Take the same musical notes and play them in the wrong order, and it's unbelievably grating. Try it. Even though the Beatles had this backwards thing that Paul is dead or whatever, But it wasn't music. Maybe you send messages. So it's the same musical notes, but played in the wrong order. Music is harmony, and it responds to the natural harmony of the soul. That's why young children, without any training, and even children in fetuses, there's evidence of babies in the mother's womb that respond to music that's being played and that they can hear. You see movement, the legs, the arms. How do they know that? How do they know to move? Language, you can say a child grows up and hears the parents speak, so they learn to mimic. Even though we know that's not enough either, they must have some language within them, because to learn in 2 years, to speak in 3 years a full language isn't just enough to mimic someone. You see, animals can do that. So clearly a child has something within. But nevertheless, you could say, that's why some children know whatever language it is, the language of their parents. But there's, of course, language is not just the words you use, it's also a certain ability to communicate. But how would they know music? They have no one to look at. A fetus, baby in his mother's womb. So the scientists have not figured that out yet. The Kabbalists say the reason is because music is the language of the soul, and the soul and music are one. As a matter of fact, for a soul to move from one place to the next, it needs a song. So in heaven, in Gan Eden, in paradise, where the souls congregate, they travel through music. A soul within a body, the body travels through our legs, and we have vehicles, etc. But how does the soul move? When you say, I was moved by that, you don't mean physically moved, you mean your heart was moved. Something harmonious from the outside sparked, there was a catalyst that awakened the harmony within you. So this woman, when she was playing music, what was happening was she was able to, through the music, connected to the harmony of her soul that was so locked and trapped. Now her challenge was, and then she learned to figure it out, and I think music therapy does some of this, she learned to figure out how to let it spill over, not just when she was playing piano, but the rest of her life. How can you access that harmony? But the fact that she was able to do that, no matter what her life was like, is clear that this is clear proof that the soul remains intact. It's just, as I said, trapped in a cave with no access. So really what a nurturing environment does for us, as opposed to a divisive one, is it helps you develop the tools to access the harmony that's natural and inherent within the soul. And a lack of a nurturing environment, a divisive environment, basically aborts the ability to build those tools. It doesn't really, in other words, destroy the soul's harmony. It just doesn't give you don't know how to access it. It would be the equivalent of a child growing up and never going to any school. A brilliant child who never learned how to write, never learned how to communicate. So the brilliance is there, but they weren't taught the tools how to access it. You often see this kids in school that are very shy. And sometimes that's misunderstood as being stupid. Or something else, or something wrong with them. Then you find out at some point that some of those shy children are the smartest in the class. They don't express themselves, whatever reason that they're shy. In other words, there's a lot within us that we don't know how to express. And true healing is not about trying to give you something new. It's trying to help you find those things that are inside of you. Some of it you may be aware of, most of it you're not. And find the tools and the so-called the shovels and the picks and the hammers and all the other equipment to draw it out of that person. That's what a good mentor, a good coach can do. They don't give you anything new. They help you recognize it within you and help you develop tools that you may have never learned to use. Which is a tremendous message, because it really means that there's a lot of hope. And all of us are fundamentally intact, as opposed to all the messages we get all day about how broken we are. So yes, intact souls can grow up in broken homes. And the soul remains intact, but there's a disconnect between the soul's harmony and its outer expression. I've seen this countless times. You see people who their expression is often extremely disturbing. There are people who just have a bitter attitude, for example. Or they have just an attitude, maybe. You don't even use the word bitter. And you don't want to, who wants to be around a person like that? And small petty things become big things. Anybody knows anybody like this? The question is whether anybody thinks you're like that. That's the question. Okay, good. Hope so. And it's difficult because sometimes you just don't want to deal with a person like that. But I have seen, as I said countless times, people like that is basically the outer package has become so tough and rough for whatever reason. Either they think that's the way to survive, or that's what they learned from their mother or father, that it conceals a very beautiful person within. Now you could say, okay, it's not my mission and job to go to every obnoxious human being on earth and figure out how to reveal their divine soul. So no one suggests that's what you have to do, but there are people that God sent you in your life you can't get rid of. And they are part of your so-called sphere of influence, whether it's family members or workers, co-workers, or people that are just happen to be in your orbit. And yes, you can have two ways to approach it. One is to avoid them. Two is to let them get to you and you become as bitter as they because you reciprocate. Or three, you learn to recognize and rise above it and recognize that there's a deeper beauty in every human being. It's very hard to show kindness to someone who's very obnoxious to you. It's very hard to turn the other cheek. Now, Jews in general don't believe in turning the other cheek, but we do believe in showing kindness even to those that are hurtful. This doesn't mean being naive and being vulnerable and allowing yourself to be taken advantage of. But look at Joseph, the story of Joseph in the Torah, for which he is rewarded tremendously in his generations to come. Even today we benefit from what Joseph did. So Joseph is taken as a young 17-year-old boy, ripped away from his father. He lost his mother, Rachel, already, and given up on as dead because his father and others thought that he was killed. Instead, it was his jealousy of his brothers that first tried to almost killed him. Instead, threw him to a pit, then sold him into slavery. He ends up in Egypt. And turn the clock fast forward, 22 years later, he meets his brothers, and they reunite. The long story in the Bible and the Torah about it. 22 years. So now he's 39 years old. He's built a life, and he's a leader of a country. He turned Egypt into a superpower. He's a Mishnah Lamela, the second in command. And they meet Joseph when he reveals himself in Vayigash, chapter Vayigash. He reveals himself. So, of course, the brothers buried their faces in shame. Because here was a person that they almost killed and caused such misery to. And Joseph says to them, you know, he had all the power to avenge his life. He was the king second in command, as I said. And Joseph says the immortal words. He says, "Do not think it's because of you that I was sent to Egypt. It's God that led me here in order for me to be able to save you and our father and our families." Because remember, because of Joseph's plan to store the wheat, the grain, that they had enough grain during the famine, or else Egypt would have died also in the famine. And definitely Jacob and the Jewish people. So it was God who led me here for me to be able to save all of you. Now this would of course bring Jacob and the 70 souls down to Egypt, which would lead of course to the next stage where they were enslaved. But then in turn, through that they became a great nation. So in a sense, Joseph's coming down to Egypt, even though at the time, which seemed like the most horrible story, and the way the brothers did it, and that was definitely not their intention, Joseph was able to transcend, saw the bigger picture. He didn't reciprocate. The Zohar says as a result of that, he, his family, and Jewish people in general, rewarded to the end of time because he was able to, he did what very few can do. It's called Mavir al Midaisov. He did not tit for tat. The natural thing to do when someone does something bad to you is to ignore them at a minimum, usually more than that. Get even. Someone yells at you unfairly, you yell back at them. And here Joseph was able to do that out of strength, not out of weakness, not because he was a wimp and couldn't stand up for himself and didn't know how to confront his brothers. It was the strength of understanding the divine hand in life. It's interesting, 22 years. Very rare you have such an incident. But because of that, he brought the best out of them, but he brought the best out of himself. So we all have this crossroad in these 3 weeks when we talk about divisiveness in our own lives. We all have a crossroad. You can either continue being part of the problem or you become part of the solution. A person may have grown up in terrible circumstances, and you can blame your parents and environment and the community, but there comes a point you become an adult, and there's no challenge in life that we cannot overcome. That means that no matter what our past is like, remember, the soul remains intact. The question is developing those tools. Is it hard work? Absolutely, it's a hard work. Look, we're already almost 2,000 years trying to fix this divisive thing, and it hasn't really worked. So you look around today, you see the Jewish people, a lot of beautiful things, but there's unfortunately a lot of divisiveness. It's a tragedy, unfortunately, is bringing us all together. Last week, a little boy that was killed brutally killed in Borough Park. So, show of unity. I hear there's hours and hours of people waiting. I mean, the Shiva is over to visit the family. Do we have to wait for tragedies to be united? Hitler, the Germans, the Nazis, were united Jews in hatred. Everybody was equal by then. Half Jews, quarter Jews, Reform, conservative, Orthodox, non-denominational, unaffiliated. Everybody was equal. They didn't separate them. Everybody was the same Jew. So why is it that we have to wait for hatred and tragedy to be united? Okay, the natural answer is obvious, because when that happens, suddenly you get focused, and suddenly crystallizes what's important. Is it possible to carry over that type of unity when things are good? That's the question. They said, my father mentioned the story I told you before that I mentioned my father. The time of tragedy had that type of love. A guy was able to just bring in whatever it was. He'd probably been the equivalent of then must have been hundreds of thousands of dollars, 20,000 ruble. But it didn't matter to him, because he didn't know where he was going. There's a woman that needs it. He thought she may be a widow, 2 little baby boys. Here. Can we carry that? So in times of trouble, crisis, it seems like we're able to do sometimes things like that. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure some people in times of crisis brings out the worst in them. Remember, there were also Jews during the Nazi period that weren't exactly their best behavior. But you can understand why some are, because it brings out, like the tea bag. You don't know how strong you are until you put her into hot water. The question and the challenge we have today, for the first time in history, whenever they cried for Shavasar B'Tammuz and fasted, it was usually until the last few decades, they had problems. There was plenty to cry about. Today, we have a comfortable life. And without a tragedy, and God should bless us, we shouldn't have any negatives, are we able to create such unity? That requires a very serious commitment, because the catalyst is not going to come from a negative. It's going to have to come from a positive. A passionate desire to really find that type of connection. I have no doubt, and as a student of the human condition, that in the next generation we're going to see a major backlash for the good of a response to all this dysfunctionality. I see it already in some, because we're now getting into the second generation of children, grandchildren growing up in dysfunctional homes. That really began after World War II. So it's a relatively short period, generationally speaking. And there's going to be a backlash, because that's what happens. When you hit rock bottom, and people say enough is enough, and enough people say enough is enough, things change. It's the cycles of history, the cycles of the story of life. Enough people do not want to have the type of lack of love and the divisiveness and the chaos that they grew up in, or they saw their parents grow up in. And when enough people hits a critical mass, there's a shift of consciousness and things happen. And obviously the cycle continues. But we don't have to necessarily wait for this critical mass. We each have control over this. So I find it fascinating that in the 3 weeks that we have, this period of 3 weeks, the Jews always focused on this, always understood. Bring unity into the picture and you have blessings. Bring divisiveness and you have curses. Because that's ultimately the two choices. Now, as I said, divisiveness begins within ourselves. They tell that story. The student comes home from college. His grandfather doesn't even know what a college is. Asks him, "What are you learning?" He says, "I'm learning sociology, psychology, and theology. Three ologies." And his grandfather says, what are these three things? So he tells him, so sociology is about interacting, social animals, people interacting with each other. Psychology is people interacting with themselves, understanding the inner psyche. And theology is relationship with understanding God. So his grandfather said, I don't know, these names are very, very fancy and very new. In our days, we had this as well. We had simply what was called, what you're calling was psychology. It was what you call sociology is when we had fights with each other in the shtetl. Psychology is when we fought with ourselves, and theology is when we were fighting with God. When you think about it, he personalized it in that type of sense that that the battles of life begin obviously within ourselves. Now, you could say it sounds strange. We know one of the worst, God forbid, one of the worst diseases is when the immune system turns on itself. There's a disease, I'm not sure what it's called. Lupus is that? There's a few diseases like that. Where the immune system, yeah. Which means that there's a part of you that's you're fighting yourself. In a healthy body, though there's 75 trillion cells and so many different systems, there's a certain balance. And when there's an attack from an intruder, like an infection, or a bacteria, or viral, so the body mobilizes the white cells, blood cells, and other forces to mobilize to protect. But what happens when the body turns on itself? Now, psychologically, there's an equivalent of that too. We have constant struggles within ourselves. Even though it's not so obvious at all times, the battles we have, sometimes your instincts tell you one thing, and your mind tells you another. Your mind and your heart. And it's hard to really know. It's in general the doubts that we are plagued with. Anxiety and doubts that we have, trying to understand which is the right path to take when you have two options. And one voice tells you this and one voice tells you that. Some people live years and years, entire lives, not being able to come to a resolution. The damage that does is very powerful, because what it does is it undermines your own confidence. And every day that passes that you don't make a commitment or a decision, it just weakens, and then to the point that it comes a point you just are unable, you just become indecisive about important matters. And there are many other forms of this type of conflict. But I mentioned before, children growing up in a divisive environment. Also, there is one other thing that I alluded to, but spell it out more, is they begin to second guess themselves. Because you look to your parents as a child for direction. In the beginning, you listen to them, for good or for bad. After a while, if it's bad advice or bad role modeling, you begin to start, at some point you start questioning and wonder. But then you second guess yourself, because that's my parent. They're like God. They can't make a mistake. Something must be wrong with me. There's the phenomenon that children of divorce, or in general of any type of abusive environment, blame themselves. And people wonder, why would a child blame himself when two parents get divorced? And the parents, let's say, do the best job explaining it has nothing to do with you, it's us, we loved each other, people grow apart, whatever it is. Children, no matter what, blindly, emotionally will blame themselves. And the answer is hard for us to understand as adults, because we don't think like this, but children, you have to remember, the same syndrome exists. Why would a child, for example, if being hurt in its own home, not leave? I'm not talking about a teenager, a young child. Because you see, for a child's mentality, walking over the threshold of the door of your house is like walking off the earth. There is no world outside. Child is not yet developed and understands that there's my world, there's another world, there are friends. These things come with time. So for the child, there is no such option. So there's nowhere to go. Parents are God. Not because the child is almost stupid or naive, because that's the only thing a child knows. A child has not yet developed the boundaries. So it sees a parent does something wrong, and it's sure that something's wrong, the child will absolutely never blame the parent, will blame themselves. And even when growing into adults, when we begin to go through therapy and try to work this through, It's a big job. It's not that simple. People still blame themselves. No matter how much your mind tells you otherwise, is you know clearly that your father, or God forbid, whoever it was, is an unhealthy person, emotionally you still somewhere subtly blame yourself. Like if I had done something different, it would have been different. I provoked, whatever it may be. The reason is, not because something's the matter with you, because we look at our parents as we want to believe that there's unconditional love. So when there's divisiveness, and when there's disagreement, and when there's inconsistency, what happens is you begin to second guess yourself about everything, and you're not sure. You can't make that decision. I don't think I've met anyone on earth that doesn't have an element of this. The question is, as I said before, measure. Some, it controls your life, and for some it's more subtle, big decisions or certain situations where you get frozen and paralyzed. So there's nothing wrong with having these symptoms because they're natural. But the more you understand the forces behind that are at work, the better, the easier to handle it. So we have this period in time, not 1 day, not 2 days, 21 days, 3 weeks, that we're given in a way, as I said, I wouldn't call it a gift, but it's awareness, focus in, introspection on this area of our lives called divisiveness. It's a curse. It is a curse, it's a disease, and it's an anomaly. And it doesn't have to be that way. And ultimately, when you begin with the process, the ingredient, the formula of how do you begin to heal from within, is obviously discovering that focal point that leads you and connects you. That woman's case that I mentioned with the music, it was her music that was able to bring her to that place. And then the challenge was how to draw it into the rest of her life. But you see, think of it this way. I've often mentioned about the concept of a mission statement. When you have a mission statement in a business, and of course in your personal life, it is a hub that connects everything. It's the epitome of unity. What is the epitome of divisiveness? Is when you're busy with fragments in your life. Now there's some people invested in having fragmented lives because it's safer. They always have escape hatches. But what's a fragmented life? We all live fragmented lives. If you were to list tonight, you get home, if you're not that tired, or tomorrow, write down a list of everything you did today. Everything. From the moment you woke up, press the snooze button, press it again, whatever. The regimens each of us go through: exercise, or you should have exercised, showering, getting dressed, grooming, breakfast, coffee break, tea break, commuting. I'm not necessarily in that order, but you get the idea. And you list it all. List it all. Going to work, lunch break, reading, significant things, important things, many petty, many menial things. So you'll come up with a list, and I've tested this, of around 100 items. 100 items. And then try to draw a line to connect these items. You'll find very few connect with each other. Like having lunch had nothing really to do with what happened later in the afternoon when you went for a business meeting. Obviously you need to have lunch to eat, but I mean to say it wasn't directly connected. You'll have a whole bunch of threads that are basically loose threads, that are a lot of fragments. Now you may not think, big thing, so what? So what? Everybody has that. But here's the so what. It accumulates day after day, and week after week, and month after month, and year after year, and decade after decade, and century, and millennium after millennium. We even have millenniums. Just 11 years ago, a new millennium. It ends up being millions and millions, and who knows how many fragments. If you think that doesn't have effect on your life, you're mistaken. There's a few fragments, it's one thing, but it accumulates to the point where your life is made up of thousands and thousands of disjointed pieces, with a few significant things that somewhat keep you, focused. And even those things, one must wonder how significant they are. Maybe that just keeps you busy. So here you have the perfect example of divisiveness in your own life. Now it's not divisiveness in an overt sense. It's not like every detail that's fragmented is fighting with every other detail. But the bottom line is they're not connected. And they each one have to wear down on you. So imagine in a business, millions of fragments of people doing all kinds of little things that have nothing to do with the core mission of the business. That business is going to fail. So this is what fragments are like. That is why it's so vital to know, and this is sense is what the 3 weeks wakes us up to, that we came to this earth on one mission. You were given millions of different tools and millions of different experiences to fulfill that one mission. But take away the one mission, then those pieces all become fragments. Keep that mission in there, and you have a hub that connects all the spokes. So the concept, for example, of Hashgacha Pratis, believe that everything is divine providence. There's a reason you're sitting here in the room tonight. It may not be exactly the reason you think it was. The reason where you'll be later tonight, places you walk, the places you travel to, who you know, even random interactions, are all part of a mysterious and hidden choreography. That choreography is the uniting force. If you don't accept that, then the alternative is a fragmented life. I'm not trying to pose and say you must accept it, but it's just showing you the eloquence of a life that's driven by a plan. Now most of us, once we hear these ideas, we're already busy in middle of the merry-go-round, running at 90 miles an hour. You can't just stop your life and say, okay, let me figure out what the mission is. But it's the point is that in Judaism, we always have an opportunity to begin anew. So when it comes this time of year, it's like a time to rethink and revisit our higher purpose. That's ultimately what creates the unity. Let me tell you the end of the story with the woman with the music. So we had long conversations. And being that I saw that she had the power to access it in her own way, I suggested to her is that she should use music to begin helping others that are similar. And she's become a major healer, has helped many, many, many people. And in turn has created a unified life in her own life. Because the fragments that she was running around, that were all part of a life that was a very broken home, shattered home, now became assets to her because they taught her how to be sensitive to others. And she teaches people through music and through other ways, through her own sensitivity, to help reconnect to a place like that. So it really comes down to, all of us need a mission in life, but especially those of us that are particularly experience divisiveness need it even more, because it is the counter force. It's that one thing. It's like that single-minded focus that connects everything. Hardcore business people who own their businesses, wherever they go, 24/7, are always looking for an opportunity. Everything is an opportunity for their business. They're single-minded and completely focused, sometimes to the point of, very disturbing to everyone but them, lack for a better word. Now think of someone who would be spiritually so single-minded, that wherever they go, they're looking for those divine sparks that God allocated to you to help elevate. That wherever you go, you figure out how to make a tikkun, how to repair, how to connect, how to help bring a little warmth, elevate that little corner of the world. That's a person that is seeking and working toward unity. It's not something that's so difficult for us to do. You have to have a different mindset. And you have to remember that when you're sitting near someone in a commute, or just in a doctor's office, or meeting someone, everything is an opportunity to bring a little warmth into the world, a little love, a little unity. And if you don't do it, what happens is your life becomes fragments, because then one thing has nothing to do with the next. For a person who has that type of sense of divine mission, from the moment you wake up, tying your shoelaces, all the way to the moment you go to sleep, it's all different aspects of revealing the divine in this world. Now, can we all be so on our best behavior all the time to feel that way? Obviously not, because we're human beings, and we're going to have our distractions, and we will get caught up in the minutia and details and so on. But that doesn't mean that you can't keep on track. And this is something that everyone has the ability to do. And what happens is when you start doing it, you start finding that type of unity. Besides the fact that it unites all the different details of your life, it unites you with other people. What do you think happens when you say a kind word to another person? You lift them up. You may not even know the effect, but you've brought a connection. You made a connection, which is the opposite of disconnection. And there is no third option, by the way. It's either disconnection or connection. There's no neutral. If it's neutral, it's disconnection. It's connection. He's always amazed by, you go to stadiums, baseball stadiums, football stadiums, cathedrals, coliseums, and you could have 60,000 people, 50,000 people all cheering. And if someone, a Martian or someone from the outside would come and look at this, an alien, say, wow, look at this unity, everybody's cheering. Now we all know that most people don't even know who the person next to them is. They just have a common cause for that moment. And afterwards, if they ask them a favor, they probably not necessarily would do it. And then everyone goes back home. But there's the illusion of this type of unity. Everyone goes home to their lonely place. It's always that lonely scene when you see the musicians or the artists or the performers packing up and everybody's gone, because suddenly you see reality strikes. Before that, it looked good. Now, I'm not taking away from the moment. I wish that moment can last. But it's important, we create these so-called superficial unifying things. We're all fans of something. It's very superficial because you don't really care about the other person. If they came to you for a loan, it's not like you would give it to them. Or if they came for a favor, you wouldn't have time for them. Because we do have an instinct of wanting to gravitate towards some type of commonality, common causes. And these are easy ones because there's no price to pay. So we have these 3 weeks as an opportunity to look at this, and this is how we create unity. Firstly, in our own details of our lives. Secondly, in how we interact with others. And as I said, remember the global picture is a direct effect and a domino effect from how we are as individuals. Because when enough individuals, critical mass, behave in this fashion, it has to affect nations. When they did the humanitarian efforts to save Haiti, after the earthquake last year, even though you can be cynical and say, okay, everybody's competing to who can be more humanitarian, be more popular. But the fact is we cannot ignore a certain phenomenon that's unprecedented, even if it has ulterior motives. In history, study history, when a natural disaster struck a country, what happened? Every neighboring country pillaged, raped, and took control of that country. This is what happened in Greece and Rome and some of the great fires and earthquakes and volcanoes. It's an opportunity to destroy everyone around, take control. So it is unprecedented to have a nation that not necessarily is needed. The Haiti's resources have been raped a long time ago. But a certain type of attitude that there is an obligation to help each other. As I said, you can take a cynical approach and say America is busy making new markets for itself, for McDonald's and IBM and Microsoft and Google, etc. Maybe there's an element to it, but Rome was also busy making a name for itself, and it didn't do that. It did it through enslaving everyone around. So there's some progress. Let's say they're both ulterior motives, but one is doing it at least in a way that looks humanitarian, the other one, in the past, it did it in a way that destroyed everyone around it. So the billions of dollars that this country gives to charity, to other nations. Again, we may disagree why it's going and where it's going, but the fact is, it's pretty amazing. What imagine you took all those billions of dollars and gave it back to the taxpayers, who that money's coming from. It's a nation that has this certain type of refinement, I guess, that the world has achieved of a certain sense of peace and unity. Is it where we should be? Is it always for the right reasons? Not necessarily, but even the UN, which is in many ways a laughingstock. But still, it stands in Manhattan. A lot of money is in there. A lot of diplomats. No one knows what they're doing, but there's a lot of diplomats. And there's the wall across the street that says they will turn their swords into plowshares. Isaiah's prophecy. What is that wall called? Isaiah wall? What do they call that? The wall across the US, whatever. And as I said, these messages, even though they may have ulterior motives, and I'm sure they do, but the fact is the world has evolved. We believe, and I say we Jews believe, that the world will reconnect once again, and there will be a state of total unity. Remember, unity is not cloning, and unity is not that we're all the same. Unity is harmony within diversity. So it's not about us not being different, it's about us being different, but like different musical notes, we complement each other. We complement each other. But for that to happen, the first thing is you have to get beyond your self-focus. You can't be self-centered, you have to be God-centered. The mission. We all have our needs, we all have our need to survive, we all have our selfishness. But to introduce into your life also a dimension that you're here to serve is the secret to getting to a place of unity. Even in the 12-step program, you see that the first step begins with that I have acknowledged that my life I'm out of control in my life and I have to surrender to higher power. It's essentially the first of the 10 commandments. Anechi Hashem Elokecha. Except the 10 commandments didn't come after alcohol abuse or drug abuse, it came after the Jews left Egypt. In other words, you can embrace God from light or you can embrace God through darkness. You don't have to do it through darkness. Unfortunately, as I said earlier, crisis is often what propels us, because we're running from a fire. Running from a fire you usually see is more intense than running towards something that's beautiful. Because the fire, the danger, affects us in that profound way. But it doesn't have to be that way. I've seen a few people in my life, I've seen the Rebbe was this way, some others, who were able to run toward good things with the same intensity that other people run from fires and from danger. Whether each of us can ignite that type of engine within us, I think everyone can, but it's not that easy to do alone. That's why when we do it together, it makes it a lot easier. So I want to say on a personal note, to me it's always been an honor to teaching this class we're going now, I don't know how many years, it's 30 years probably, I was counting. But for me, we're all in the same boat, we all have our challenges, we all have our things, but my commitment to it has given me back more than what I've given to it. Meeting such beautiful people like yourselves, souls, kindred spirits, it's taught me the dignity of every person's individual journey, no matter how different they are. There's a lot of beauty when you have fresh air come in, that you meet people that are not like yourself, because you see different ways. You see the mystery of life, and you embrace, in a sense, God's choreography is more complicated. It also adds to being a little more humble. And I really don't see myself as someone that is extraordinarily more selfless than others. I think it's choices we make. Who you are is a result of your choices, after all. And I see people who are beautiful people, but their choices are not so beautiful. And then there are people who are not so beautiful who make good choices. So the point is that all of us have that intact soul that I mentioned. It's a question of what choice you make. The choice you make, that's the big one. And it's very difficult to get out of our routines. Much easier to shape a child, obviously, from a young age. And they're flexible, resilient, and you just can, what's the word, malleable. Like warm wax. So it can be shaped in many directions. Once we harden, not only our arteries, but our personalities, we have our routines and our convictions and the things we've convinced ourselves of, whether it's true or not, but we think we know. Those things all become like these traps where we don't have that the same flexibility to be able to make decisions and choices. But as Rabbi Akiva taught us, at age 40, he was able to change his entire life. He learned it from the little drops of water that persistently and consistently bore a hole through stone. It's not about big moves, it's about consistency. So my suggestion in the 3 weeks, I think it's a good opportune time to rethink this all. It's like, when things are destroyed, the temple is destroyed, it's a time to, like a building is being raised, that's a good time to rethink the plan. When your building is standing, so it's difficult to go upholster and redesign. But when the building is down, it's a good time to rethink many things. I don't mean that, God forbid, in any personal way. I hope everybody's buildings stand well and your homes are intact. But I mean spiritually and emotionally when we talk about the destruction of the temple. You go to the Kotel. I was so rushed in Israel, I didn't even have a chance to go there, I must say. But you go there, what is it? A broken wall, basically. A remnant. And I remember walking down, not this time, but another time, walking down the steps in the old city. It's called the Rova, Jewish quarter. So you go down the steps. As you go down the steps, the first thing that really gets you is the looming big golden dome. There's some point where the golden dome is like bigger than anything. And then if you look to the right, there's a silver dome. And then if it's a Friday, you start hearing, especially Fridays, you hear the bells ringing from all the churches. And I remember walking down one, it was a Friday, I think. Yes, it was a Friday, and I was looking at it all. The domes are beautiful, beautiful architecture. It glistens in the sun. And then those church bells sound like angels and hymns. And then you come down, what's the competition? We got a broken wall with shrubs coming out of it, uneven stones. And it's not even the wall of the temple, it's the wall of the outside temple. And the whole Temple Mount is basically a wilderness. So how can you compete? A broken wall with beautiful architecture, these mosques, and the church bells. But as they say, there's nothing as straight as a crooked ladder. There's nothing as crooked as a straight lie. There's nothing as complete as a broken heart. In a broken world, something that looks broken is actually healthier than if it looks too good. Some people complain about Los Angeles as being a beautiful city, beautiful climate, but it's plastic. It never changes. I'm sure there's some poets that wrote about New York City. New York City is not consistent. Freezing, bitter cold. There's blistering heat that is upon us. Then we have those, everyone, New Yorkers know, April, May, beautiful. September, October, beautiful, usually. But New York reflects, some say, the realities of life. Life is not a consistent climate. It's not called celluloid heroes. It's made of changes. And in many ways, it's interesting that the weather, even though it seems like an external thing, it reflects reality. Sometimes you live in a climate that's so consistent, it creates the illusion that everybody is this way, and it's not the case. So in a world that's broken, you want to have some things that are reminding you it's broken. You don't want to convince yourself things are complete when they're not. So in a strange way, the beautiful mosques and the churches and so on, let them have what they have. And the Jews remind themselves of reality with a broken wall. But that broken wall, in many ways, is more complete. So when we stand in 3 weeks, even though in a sense we mourn and grieve over a broken temple and a Temple Mount, but look of what it elicited in the Jewish people. Faith, hope. Now it has to elicit unity. That's what it elicits. That's one of the things of the Kotel, beautiful Friday night. You have all the minyanim, the only synagogue in the world where everybody davens in one place. On the way back from Jerusalem yesterday, this morning, I don't even know when did I leave. Well, it was Wednesday morning in Israel. So I was on the Sheirut, it's called this like shuttle from Jerusalem to the airport, Nesher, the Eagle, they call it. And we come to the airport, you have the checkpoint there. All the cars stop before you go into the airport. So they check especially these type of shuttles. So the guard comes in, and I can't stop laughing what I heard. So the driver, is like one of these Israeli, very brusque and blunt, says to the guard, "Kulam po anoshim tovim, hashar hisharti babet hakneset." Bill, you want to translate? It was funny. It was a little anti-Semitic, so I feel comfortable repeating it, but it was an interesting expression, especially, I don't want to say it in 3 weeks, but I'll tell you what I just said. He said, all the people here are good, because he come to check whether we're terrorists or whatever. He said, all the people here are good. The rest I left in the shul in Jerusalem, basically. And everybody burst out laughing in the show. Now, obviously, as I said, it's not exactly a pleasant statement, but what he was reflecting was he was a secular guy, and he was reflecting that the image, the stereotype, sometimes justified, that people in synagogues or people who are too devout are part of the divisiveness, not part of the unity. Frankly, I think we're all part of it. Everybody, takes two to tango. There's no such thing as blaming one person. Everybody is part of it. And it's sadder, of course, if it's coming from a person who's more committed and religious officially, because they should know better. They should know that it's about having us all joining together and uniting together. But getting back to us, I'm not here to point fingers at anybody except ourselves. We have an opportunity here. And don't underestimate what one person can achieve. Because if you shift the little trend, the tide, in your little world, it has an effect. There's no question in my mind. And it's not about measuring, it's not about getting awards and being honored. It's about doing what has to be done. I remember I was in northern Minnesota years ago. And a guy, I guess a local, took us, and he said, I want to show you something. And he took us to this place where there was a little trickle of like a tiny trickle of water coming over the Canadian border into Minnesota. Okay, so why are you showing this to us? So he says, here, look, I'm going to stop this trickle right now. And he put his foot down. It was simple, it was very easy. It was like literally less than a faucet. And he says, if I stay here now for the rest of for a period of time, the Mississippi will dry up. Because that trickle was the place where the Mississippi gets its water from the northern Canada, comes through a trickle. And obviously, if he stands there, it's going to start building up and building up. It's not so simple. He's not a human dam. But the point was that some of the most powerful things on earth begin in a place, and there's one little area, just you change something there, and everything changes. Now, in physics today, it's a common phenomenon, butterfly effect. And we don't count, size doesn't matter. One mutant cell, what it can do, one extra dot or one fewer dot in a program, computer program. So we understand it in our minds, but we still have the illusion that something large is more powerful. So the fact is, our little shifts of creating a little unity in your own little world has a ripple effect, and even in your own life, it's like unity breeds unity, divisiveness breeds divisiveness, and when you begin to connect a few things in your life a little more, it spills over to the next level. It's a regular thing. So sometimes you have to begin, like when you have to untangle yarn. You have wires and you get frustrated trying to untangle a whole bundle of wires. Sometimes the best way is not to try to get too aggressive, but to go to the periphery, to the edge, and untangle the easier tangles. And then you basically zero in on, you isolate the more tougher situation, and it gets easier to untangle. You untangle smaller things, they help you untangle bigger things. So it's not always important to go take the bull by the horns and try to attack the part of our lives that's most difficult, that's most resistant. It's more important to just figure out little things that you can do, sometimes positive things, because when there's less resistance, it'll be easier to do. So I think that's a good resolution we should all take upon ourselves this evening, this 3 weeks, to bring a little unity into this world, in ourselves and those around us, and understand how divisiveness is a cancer and a disease that it destroys. It has all the forces that destroy, though it's not as blatant as a weapon or ammunition, but its destruction is much more subliminal, so much more. What was the word I wanted to use? Well, there's a word, not subliminal. Something like undercover, doing damage undercover. Anyway, anyone got the word? It'll come to me. Fine. So, finally connect the dots here. I said this parsha also mentions that Midian, the war against Midian. Midian in Hebrew comes from the word Madain, which means machlekes, war. Machlekes is discord and disagreement. And that's why we read it this week, the first of the 3 weeks, because it's the theme of this time, which is how to counter baseless hatred with baseless love. So figure out, maybe you can find someone you can love for no reason at all. How about that? That would be a nice exercise. First, for ourselves to do something that maybe you're not getting any direct gain from. And secondly, it introduces into the world another type of energy, which counters, as I said, baseless hatred. Because hatred, you have plenty of people that just dislike others for no particular reason. So maybe bring a little love like that into the world. It could also, it will have its impact. So with that being said, I will say Philip's class is not on for the next 2 weeks, right? So his vacation. I will dedicate the class, finally, I can announce, to somebody I've been telling that I have my wedding shoes, dancing shoes ready for I don't know how many years. Started out in this class over 10 years ago. So our good friend Mark Belinsky is engaged. Okay. Some of you may know him, if you don't know him. So that basically, let me tell you this. That means there's hope for everybody. Don't get me wrong, not that I think that he was the most difficult case, but he was struggling with this for many years. And so he's engaged. I want to say Mazel Tov to him, Mark, wherever you are. And hope we see you again. This class is not only for singles, right? And as far as next week goes, I believe I will not be here next week, but please stay tuned with the emails and we'll keep you posted exactly what's going on. Maybe, who knows, maybe I'll figure something out. So, with that being said, anything else I should add? If you haven't left your email address, please leave that for us so we can stay in touch, especially if there's any last minute changes. I send out also a weekly email. This week I'm writing should be a pretty provocative one. It's called World War III. Avenging the life of Levi Kletsky. That's the subtitle. So I'll let you. You have to read it. I'm not going to spill the beans here. We have to keep you. What is it called? I should also probably end the class with some suspense every week, and leave something unfinished. So to have you come back, is that a way to do it? They do that well on the soap operas. I don't know if I want to do that, but anyway. What shall I say? It's a privilege and honor to be a little link that connects us to each other. I feel that way, and I hope each of you feel that way yourselves, and more importantly, continue the chain wherever it is that you traverse, wherever you will travel, especially during this summer. And if I could be of any help or suggestions or support or ideas, by all means, please call on me. And it's an honor to be here. Thank you. Have a very pleasant night. Bye-bye.